The night I found out, I was holding a grocery bag with a six-pack of her favorite sparkling water and a bouquet of sunflowers I'd picked up on impulse. That's the part that kills me every time I replay it. The sunflowers? My wife. I'll call her by what she was to me then, not what she became. Had texted me that morning saying she was exhausted, that the week had been brutal at work, and that she wanted to do something low-key on Friday night. Just her and a few girlfriends. Wine, maybe a movie. She'd asked me to take our son, Jake, to my brother's place for the night so she could decompress without worrying about bedtime routines and noise levels. I thought that was reasonable. 13 years of marriage teaches you when to give someone space. Jake was 11. He was at the age where spending the night at Uncle Roy's was more exciting than anything we could offer at home anyway, because Roy had a gaming setup that took up half his living room and a dog named Bucket who slept on the couch like a person. I dropped Jake off around 5:30, stayed for one beer, and then decided, completely on my own, no plan, no agenda, to stop by the grocery store on the way home to pick up a few things for the weekend. The sunflowers were in a bucket near the exit. $6. I grabbed them because she'd mentioned once, maybe 2 years ago, that sunflowers made her feel like summer. I still remember thinking, as I pulled into our street, that this was the kind of small thing that kept a marriage alive. The unannounced gesture, the proof that you were still paying attention. Our house was at the end of a cul-de-sac. Quiet neighborhood. The kind of street where you know whose car belongs to whom, because nothing ever changes. Except that night, both sides of the street were lined with cars I didn't recognize. I slowed down, counted them. 7, 8, maybe 10 vehicles squeezed between the driveways, one with its rear wheel half up on someone's lawn. I told myself maybe the Hendersons 2 doors down were having people over. That happens sometimes. Then I saw the lights in our windows, not the soft lamp glow of a quiet evening. Every room was lit. And through the front curtain, the curtain my wife had picked out from a catalog and spent 20 minutes describing the exact shade of ivory she wanted, I could see movement, shadows crossing back and forth, more than a few. I parked down the block. I don't know why. Some instinct told me not to pull into the driveway. I sat in the car for maybe 2 minutes, grocery bag in my lap, sunflowers resting against the passenger seat. Then I got out. I could hear the music from the front walk, not loud enough to disturb the neighbors, but loud enough. Bass. I could feel in my sternum. And voices, layered, overlapping, the specific acoustic texture of a party in full swing. I stood at my own front door and listened. Then I unlocked it and walked in. The entryway was dark, but the living room was not. Someone had rearranged the furniture, the coffee table pushed to the wall, chairs moved, to make a kind of open floor space. There were at least 20 people, maybe more. Drinks in hand, grouped in clusters, laughing at things I hadn't heard. A woman I vaguely recognized from somewhere, a school event, maybe, looked up when I walked in and smiled, like I was another guest. My wife was across the room. She was standing near the kitchen doorway, her back to me, talking to a man I had never seen before. He was tall. Dark jacket, the kind of casual, confident posture that doesn't come from being nervous in a room. He said something and she laughed, not politely, genuinely, and put her hand on his arm. She hadn't heard me come in. I watched for about 15 seconds. That's all it took. 13 years. And I knew, not because of the party, not even because of the man. It was the way she was standing, the way her whole body was angled toward him. I hadn't seen her stand like that in a long time. Not with me. There was something unguarded about it, open in a way she hadn't been with me in. I didn't want to calculate how long. I set the grocery bag on the entryway table. The sunflowers I kept in my hand. I'm not sure why. I crossed the room. She turned before I reached her. Maybe she felt the shift in the room. She turned before I reached her. Maybe she felt the shift in the room. Maybe someone caught her eye. But she turned, and the color drained out of her face so completely and so fast that the man standing next to her noticed and looked over. "Hey," I said. My voice was calm. I was surprised by that. "What do you—" She stopped. "Swallowed. I thought you were." She stopped. "Swallowed. I thought you were at Roy's." "I was," I said. I came back. The man. I'd find out later his name was Troy. That he worked in her office building, though not in her company. That they had been sleeping together for approximately 4 months. Looked between us with the specific discomfort of someone who suddenly understands exactly where he is standing. He took a half step back. "Can we talk?" my wife said. Her voice was low, urgent. "Sure," I said. Let's talk. I looked around the room. The music was still playing. A few people near us had gone quiet, picking up on something, but most of the party hadn't noticed. I spotted the Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf. Our bookshelf. The one I'd assembled in this room on a Saturday afternoon 2 years ago, and walked over and unplugged it. The room went quiet in stages. Conversation dropped away. 20-something people turned to look at me. I think it's time to wrap this up, I said. Not loud, not angry, just clear. Please take your drinks and head out now. There was a long pause. Then people started moving. There's something in a certain tone of voice. Not volume, not rage, just absolute certainty that people respond to. Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. They gathered their things. They left. My wife stood in the middle of the room watching them go. Troy left too without looking at me again. I noticed that. When the last person was out, I closed the front door. The house was quiet. It smelled like other people, unfamiliar perfume, spilled beer somewhere, the faint residue of too many bodies in a space that was supposed to be ours. She started talking immediately. She said she was sorry. She said it got out of hand, that she hadn't planned for it to be like this. She said Troy was just a friend, that I didn't understand the context. She was speaking quickly, the way people do when they're trying to fill silence before the other person can think. I put the sunflowers down on the kitchen counter and looked at her. How long? I asked. She stopped. How long? I said again. That's all I'm asking right now. The pause told me more than the answer did. 4 months, she said finally. I nodded. I walked to the kitchen cabinet, got a glass, filled it with water, and drank it standing at the sink. I needed something to do with my hands. I needed 30 seconds to let that number land. 4 months. A third of a year. While I was driving Jake to soccer practice and filing quarterly reports and assembling furniture and picking out curtains and buying sunflowers on impulse because she once said they made her feel like summer, she followed me into the kitchen. She was crying now. She said we could fix it. She said she would go to therapy, that we could go together, that this didn't have to mean what I thought it meant. She said she loved me. She said she had just felt invisible for a long time. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I need you to call your sister and ask if you can stay there tonight. She stared at me. Jake is at Roy's, I said. I'll pick him up in the morning and take him to school. We'll figure out the rest later. But tonight, I need you to not be here. You're serious? Yes. Can we sit down and talk about this, please? I know I heard everything you said. My voice was still calm. I kept waiting for the anger to arrive, the white-hot kind, the kind that makes you break things or say words you can't take back. It didn't come. What came instead was a kind of cold clarity, like the whole room had been brought into sharp focus. I need tonight. Please call your sister. She made the call. She packed a bag. She left. I cleaned up the house. I don't know how long it took. Probably 2 hours. I gathered cups and bottles and threw away things I didn't recognize. Someone's jacket left on the armchair. A pair of sunglasses on the windowsill. I moved the furniture back to where it belonged. I found the water ring on the coffee table from someone's drink and spent 10 minutes trying to lift it with a cloth. I mopped the kitchen floor. I straightened the cushions. At some point, I sat down on the couch in the living room. The room that was now quiet and rearranged and smelling of cleaning spray instead of strangers. And I just breathed. 13 years. Jake had been born in this house. Not literally, but we brought him home here, stood in that doorway, this terrified young couple holding an infant who didn't know yet what kind of family he was going to have. I thought about him then. Not about me, not about the marriage or the betrayal, or Troy with his confident posture and his dark jacket. I thought about Jake, asleep at Roy's house with Bucket on the couch beside him, dreaming whatever 11-year-olds dream about, completely unaware that his life was about to change shape. That was the hardest part. Not the lie, not the 4 months, not the party full of strangers in my living room. It was knowing that whatever happened next, Jake was going to feel it. And that whatever I did, I had to do it in a way that made sense to him someday. I didn't yell. I didn't call her names. I didn't show up at her sister's house. I didn't text Troy. I know that might disappoint some people. There's a version of this story where the wronged husband confronts the other man, where there's a scene where justice is loud and immediate. That's not what happened. What happened was, I called a lawyer the following Monday, not because I'd made a final decision overnight, but because I needed to understand my options before I had any more conversations. I needed to know what I was walking into. I had spent 13 years making decisions based on incomplete information, apparently. I wasn't going to do that again. My wife wanted to talk. She texted, then called, then texted again. She said she'd ended things with Troy. She said she'd already made an appointment with a therapist for herself, and she wanted me to consider couples counseling. She was not cruel about it. She wasn't dramatic. She was stood present in a way she hadn't been in a while. And I noticed the irony of that. I met her for coffee, once, about a week after. I wanted to hear her out. I owed her that much, maybe. We'd built a life together. I wasn't going to burn everything down without sitting across from her at a table and listening like an adult. She talked for a long time about feeling disconnected, about the weight of routine, about how she'd told herself it wasn't serious, that it didn't count in the way that mattered, that she could compartmentalize it. She cried. She meant it. I believe that. People can mean something and still have done it. The meaning doesn't cancel out the doing. I asked her one question when she was finished. If I hadn't come home that night, would you have told me? She didn't answer for a while. I don't know, she said finally. That was honest. I'll give her that. And it was honest. I'll give her that. And it was also the only answer I needed. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. It was not clean. Nothing about this process is ever really clean, but it was civil. We agreed on the important things without a courtroom fight, which was the one thing I was most grateful for. Jake split his time. He took it hard at first, the way kids do when they understand more than you wish they did. He was quiet for a while. He stopped talking about school as much. One night, about 3 months after his mother and I had separated and I was putting him to bed, he asked me if it was his fault. I sat down on the edge of his bed and I told him no. I told him that some things that happen between grown-ups have nothing to do with their kids, even when it feels like it does. I told him that his mom and I both loved him completely, separately and together, and that was not going to change. He nodded. He didn't cry. He asked if Bucket could come stay over sometime. I said yes. Obviously yes. I saw Troy once more. Not intentionally. About 6 months after everything, I was at the hardware store, the one on Ellison Ave, near the old tire shop. And he was at the next aisle over. I don't think he saw me. I watched him for a moment, this ordinary person picking out paint rollers, and I felt nothing in particular. Not rage, not satisfaction, not pity, just nothing, which, I realized later, was a kind of resolution in itself. He wasn't a villain in the way stories usually require. He was a person who made a bad decision, same as my wife had, same as, maybe, I'd made some decisions along the way that I needed to look at honestly. I'm not interested in excusing what happened, but I'm also not interested in spending the rest of my life feeding an anger that only costs me energy and gives nothing back. There's a thing people say about trust that once it's broken, it can be repaired, like a bone that heals stronger at the fracture point. I've heard it. I understand the appeal of that idea. I don't believe it. Not for me. Not in this case. Not because I'm bitter. I want to be clear about that. I'm not walking around carrying the weight of this like a wound that defines me. I have a good life. I have Jake, who is doing better now. Thriving, actually, in the way resilient kids do when the adults around them finally stop pretending and start being honest. I have work I find meaningful. I have Roy and his ridiculous dog, and a standing Friday night dinner that's become the most reliable thing in my week. I'm fine, but I think the idea that you can break something and repair it back to original condition, I think that's something we tell ourselves because the alternative is too hard to say out loud. Some things don't go back to what they were. They become something different. Sometimes that different thing is okay, sometimes it isn't. For us, it wasn't. And I made peace with that. About a year out, I was cleaning out the hall closet, one of those organizational projects you put off until you can't anymore, and I found the sunflowers. Or what was left of them. I put them in a vase that night after she left, without really thinking about it. They dried out long since, gone brittle and brown, and somehow ended up stuffed in the back of a shelf behind the extra linens. I stood there holding them for a minute. $6, a bucket near the grocery store exit. The impulse of a husband who was still paying attention on a night when the marriage had already been over for 4 months without his knowledge. I put them in the trash. I finished cleaning the closet. I made Jake breakfast. That's how it ends, really. Not in a courthouse or a confrontation. Not with a dramatic final word or a neat moral handed over like a gift. It ends in the ordinary details of a life that keeps going whether you're ready or not. The dishes get done, the kid gets fed, the closet gets cleaned, You keep showing up. That's the whole thing. You keep showing up for the people who actually deserve it. I've thought a lot about the sunflowers. Not about Troy. Not about the party, or the strangers in my living room, or the way her face went white when she turned around and saw me standing there. Those things I've processed. Those things I've processed. Those things I've put down. But the sunflowers, $6, grabbed on impulse because she once said they made her feel like summer. Those still come back to me sometimes. Because they're the clearest proof of something I've had to sit with honestly. I was paying attention. I was still showing up, still trying, still thinking about her in the small in-between moments of an ordinary Friday. And none of that was enough to hold something together that had already come apart without my knowledge. That's the part nobody tells you about being the person who got cheated on. You can do everything right and still end up holding sunflowers at a door you didn't know had already closed. For a long time, I wanted that to mean something was wrong with me, that I'd missed something, that if I'd been sharper, more present, more something, I would have seen it coming and could have stopped it. That's the story the mind reaches for, because it's easier to believe you had control than to accept that you didn't. But I've learned, slowly, the hard way, that what happened was not a verdict on who I was as a husband. It was a choice my wife made, her choice, and the consequences that followed were the natural result of that choice, not fate, not punishment from somewhere outside ourselves. Just the simple arithmetic of actions and outcomes. She chose to lie. She chose to continue for 4 months, while I drove Jake to practice and filed quarterly reports and put furniture together on Saturday afternoons. And when the truth arrived, not because she brought it, but because I happened to come home early with grocery bags and flowers, everything that followed came directly from that original decision. The party, the confrontation, the call to her sister, the 8 months of legal paperwork, Jake going quiet for a while and asking one night if it was his fault. None of that had to happen. And all of it was inevitable once the first lie was told. What I want to say, and I mean this without any bitterness, because I've genuinely arrived at a place past bitterness, is that integrity is not a performance. You don't practice it when people are watching. You practice it on a random Tuesday when no one would ever know the difference. My wife stopped practicing it, and eventually the gap between who she was in private and who she presented in our marriage became too wide to hold. That's not a metaphor. That's just what dishonesty does over time. It widens until something gives. And here's the other side of it. The part I had to look at honestly about myself. I had to choose what kind of person I was going to be in response. I could have raged. I could have gone after Troy. I could have made her pay in the small daily ways that people do when they've been hurt and want someone else to feel it. I didn't. Not because I'm particularly noble, but because I understood. Somewhere in that cold clarity of standing in my own cleaned-up kitchen at 2 a.m, that how I handled this was going to be the thing Jake remembered. He wasn't going to remember the party. He was going to remember whether his father came apart or held together, so I held together. For him, at first, and then, eventually, for myself. That's what I mean when I say intelligence and resilience aren't things you have, they're things you practice under pressure. When everything falls apart, you find out what you're actually built from. I found out I was built from something steadier than I knew. Jake is doing fine now. More than fine. He asked me last month if Bucket could be his dog too, since he splits time between 2 houses. Roy said yes. I said yes. Bucket, apparently, has no opinion either way. He just moved his sleeping spot from 1 couch to 2. You keep showing up. That's the whole answer. You keep showing up for the people who deserve it. And you stop spending yourself on the ones who don't. That's not a lesson I learned from a book. It's what a bag of groceries and a dead bouquet of sunflowers in the back of a closet taught me on a Friday night when I was 41 years old and thought I knew what my life looked like. Turns out I had no idea. And somehow, on the other side of all of it, that's okay.